What's going on? Welcome to Breaking the Set. Well, after days of bickering, our do-nothing Congress has decided to do nothing about the government shutdown. So here we are. For the first time in 17 years, Capitol Hill is technically closed for business. But don't worry, the NSA is still spying on you and the military is still drone bombing. However, all national parks are closed and services like flu monitoring by the Centers for Disease Control are shut down until further notice. To top it off, 800,000 other federal government employees are out of work with no pay indefinitely. And what about the lawmakers who caused the shutdown?
You both,
we did our job to stop that.
Just a moment, you are both paid $174,000 a year. That's your salary. Would you be prepared to add some kind of a rider or an amendment onto a continuing resolution that would take you out of the essential services category and stop payment on your paychecks in order to get a continuing resolution through? Would you both be, yes or no? Yes or no?
We're waiting to see
Would you
what
both be prepared
they offer.
to stop your paycheck?
Yes, of course, lawmakers don't have to give up their cushy salary for the mess they created. No, only hundreds of thousands of average Americans have to take a hit. Pissed off at the idea of politicians shutting themselves down and leaving us to foot the bill? Yeah, me too. Let's break the set. It's been 6 months since 200,000 gallons of oil spilled into the suburbs of Mayflower, Arkansas. The spill from the Exxon Pegasus pipeline soaked lawns and covered streets with toxic sludge.
911. We have oil everywhere. There is an oil pipeline that runs through our yard, and it has ruptured, and it is spilling oil throughout the neighborhood.
Now, Mayflower residents claim that they have lingering health effects and that Exxon has failed to properly clean up the spill. Ann Jarrell is one of those residents, and she joined me earlier. I first asked her what it was like on the ground 6 months ago.
It was very smelling very bad from the oil and the chemicals that came out. In the very first few days and few weeks, there was oil everywhere. But managed to clean up a lot of it, at least to where you can see, but there's still a lot of oil left in our cove area and back in the areas where the most public people wouldn't see it.
The state health department initially blew off the symptoms of nausea, dizziness, and said that residents were welcome to leave their homes if they wanted to. Why do you think that the health department was so nonchalant initially about serious health risks?
This is the first time they've ever had to deal with an oil spill, and this being heavy crude with all the extra chemicals in it. Their equipment that they were using to test the air with measures parts per million, where these chemicals that we were breathing in are dangerous at parts per billion. And since they didn't really know a lot about it, they were kind of following Exxon's lead because Exxon's been through this before. So they just kind of, took the reins and told them this is how we need to do stuff. And that, in my opinion, that's kind of what happened, is they were just following along.
And what are some of the short and long-term health effects that you and your fellow residents have felt from the spill?
Well, from day one, it was nauseous. I mean, it was just almost make you throw up. And I did actually vomit a couple of different times. Headaches, terrible headaches that just, I would wake up in the middle of the night crying because my head hurt so bad. And I've had migraines before, took migraine medicine, it didn't touch it. My doctor gave me several different medicines. It would not touch the headaches at all. Sore throat, coughing, and hurting even down into your lungs. It felt like you couldn't get air even though you were breathing. And then since then, anytime they do any type of work over in the rupture site area, which they've been constantly doing, digging up the oil, putting it in trucks, bringing dirt in, well, it's releasing all those toxins back into the air, and it's making everyone in our little area sick again.
And you've said that Exxon cut off temporary housing for residents once they deem the home safe, but residents are scared to go back. What are people supposed to do if they don't feel safe, yet they aren't receiving compensation for Exxon anymore?
I'm not sure what a lot of the people in Northwood are doing, if they're just, trying. I know some have rented other places there in Mayflower that's not close to the pipeliner where it, the oil spilled. I lived outside of the Northwood subdivision, just on the other side of the fence, and my house is actually closer than some of the houses that they evacuated in the Northwood subdivision. But they did not evacuate anyone on our side of the fence, even though we were as close, if not closer, to the rupture site and the oil.
And what have they done for those residents on the other side of the fence? Have they done any sort of compensation for your neighborhood?
Nothing for us. We were just totally forgotten. The crew that came in and actually laid down a roadway type thing out of plastic so they could get their big equipment into the back part behind the subdivision, red light by my house. And I was out of town, and my daughter and grandson were there, and they did put her up in a hotel for, I think it was 3, maybe 4 nights, because she was out, and we came back with the baby and couldn't get into the driveway because of all their big equipment blocking the area. And so they told her that they would pay for her to stay in a hotel just for her convenience.
What I thought was really interesting is that immediately after the spill, Exxon told residents that they didn't need to evacuate, even though some of them were just 300 yards away from where the pipes burst. Why do you think it was that Exxon was the one who was handling public relations and telling people what to do and not local government or law enforcement?
I know that I walked up to the Exxon people when they were first there right outside my driveway, and I started asking them, hey, we've got terrible headaches, we're nauseous, I've got a 3-month-old grandson in my house, shouldn't we be evacuated? And I was told by the lady from Exxon, oh no, it's nothing to worry about, this will be gone in 2 or 3 days, and yeah, you may have headaches, you may have a little nausea, but it'll be gone in just a few days and it's not going to hurt you.
And Ann, when I hear things like this and also know statistics that there's at least 100 significant oil spills across this country every year, there's absolutely no excuse from this company. Compensation needs to be made to the victims. Thank you so much for sharing your story. We'll keep on the pressure. Really appreciate your time, Ann Jarrell.
Thank you.
You know how in the wake of every disaster, there's a barrage of charity groups asking you to donate? Well, do you ever wonder how much of that money actually makes it into the hands of those who need it? Look, no doubt there's a lot of corruption out there. But if there's one person we can trust to give our money to, it's Bono, right? Well, as it turns out, the pop superstar has been catching serious flack after it was revealed that his charity, one.org, isn't quite living up to its altruistic promises. Check this out. In 2008 alone, the organization reportedly received over $50 million in donations, yet little more than 1% of that money made it into the hands of starving children. Of course, one's spokesperson defended the organization and reminded us that raising awareness with celebrities isn't cheap. So keep in mind, the next time that you're throwing money to one.org, you're basically giving money for a concert drive featuring Bono and his friends. Now, believe it or not, one.org is far from being the worst charity out there. Thanks to the Center for Investigative Reporting and the Tampa Bay Times, we now know of nearly 6,000 charities that hire corporations to get donations. For-profit corporations. Yeah, kind of defeats the purpose of a charity, doesn't it? And of those 6,000 charities, 50 of them raked in almost $1 billion to pay off their corporate solicitors instead of the hands where it was promised. Let's start with the shady Project Cure, Florida operation that's raised over $65 million over the last few decades, not a single penny of which has gone to funding any sort of cure for anything. In fact, according to IRS records, after paying off solicitors, Project Cure is actually $3 million in debt. And like many of these so-called charities, Project Cure is nothing more than a money-making scheme with a name that sounds totally legit. Which brings me to the Committee for Missing Children, a charity that took in almost $27 million over the last 10 years, yet somehow less than 1% of that money was used to find kids. So where the hell did the money go? Well, it's called the magic formula for charity money-making. What these people do is hire a nice firm to do their telemarketing and PR, and then end up paying these firms 90% of the donated funds. Basically, they're all giant do-nothing organizations. It's all a facade. And on that note, here's another black hole for your well-intentioned dollars. The Cancer Fund of America. Hey, that seems innocuous enough, right? Who doesn't want to cure cancer? Well, apparently they don't. See, the so-called nonprofit is run more like a crime syndicate than a charity. They raised $98 million in donations over the last 10 years, but less than 1% of that cash made it into anything remotely charitable. I wonder how many cancer patients died waiting for treatment from a nonprofit far too concerned with profit. But you know, there's one group that really dwarfs the rest when it comes to paying out corporations instead of those it claims to be helping. And that's the Kids Wish Network. No, not to be confused with the Make-A-Wish Foundation, an organization that is fully legitimate. See, the Kids Wish Network raises $20 million a year and $128 million over the last decade, all in the name of dying children and their families. And every year, just the same, it squanders nearly every single cent to massive corporations. In fact, it's been named the all-time worst charity by the Tampa Bay Times. You can check out the whole list in the About section of this video. So what can we do to ensure that we're not contributing to these pyramid schemes? Well, if the charity can't provide a tax deduction form, then that's your first red flag. And if you further suspect the organization, contact the Federal Trade Commission or the National White Collar Crime Center. Look, there's way too many in need out there for us to be lining the pockets of those that have too much. And just ahead, I speak with former U.S. Senator Bob Graham. Stick around. It's rare to get an insider's view on the taboo subjects I often tackle on this show. But today, former Senator and Florida Governor Bob Graham joined me to talk about the most pressing policy decisions he was involved with during his 18 years in the Senate. Graham served as the head of the Senate Intelligence Committee during 9/11. He was the chairperson for the BP Deepwater Horizon Oil Spill National Commission, and he was a member of the CIA External Advisory Board. I first asked Senator Graham about the current government shutdown and how it compares to the one 17 years ago while he was in office.
The shutdown in the mid-90s was based over budget matters. So you had a disagreement over numbers. That's relatively easy to compromise. One party says 10, the other says 8, you agree on 9. This, however, is much more fundamental. It goes to the question of the role of government, particularly in a sensitive area such as health care. I hope the parties can come together, but I think this could be a more extended closure of government than we experienced 20 or so years ago.
And you've said that you're convinced that, quote, there was a direct line between at least some of the terrorists who carried out the September 11th attacks and the government of Saudi Arabia. What evidence do you have to back up that claim?
Well, as an example, there's very extensive evidence of the situation in San Diego where 2 of the hijackers, the first 2 to have entered the country, were given extensive assistance, financial support, anonymity by persons with close ties to Saudi institutions and the government of Saudi Arabia. My suspicion is that similar relationships existed in other places in the country. There's some evidence coming out that one of those may have been a training ground for 3 of the aviators near Sarasota, Florida. So I think the questions are, what was the full extent of the role of the Saudis in 9/11? Why would the Saudis have been involved? And third, why has our government gone to such lengths to cover up the Saudi involvement?
Well, let's turn those questions around and back on you. Why do you think that Saudi Arabia wasn't fully explored? And what does it say that one of our biggest allies in this war on terror is potentially involved in carrying out 9/11?
Well, that's still a mystery. There are a lot of theories as to what it may have been. Of course, the United States since World War II has had a special relationship with Saudi Arabia in which we provide them some security assistance. They have provided us a reliable source of petroleum. The close ties between particularly the Bush administration and the Saudi royal family is another possible reason. There may well be some other reasons that we don't know.
And what was the reason told to you when you inquired about this over and over again?
No answer.
Well, you were adamantly against the Iraq War because you thought it would divert attention from Afghanistan at the time, but considering what a disaster Afghanistan has become, do you regret supporting that intervention?
No, I think Afghanistan was like Pearl Harbor. We were attacked, thousands of Americans as well as many people from other countries were killed. That is the kind of provocation that justifies a military response. My concern with Iraq is that it constituted a diversion away from achieving the goal of completing the military mission in Afghanistan, and in my judgment has substantially extended the duration of our involvement in Afghanistan. And it was predicated largely on the allegation that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq that were capable of being utilized on very short notice. I was very suspicious as to whether those weapons existed or not, and I believe the failure to find any such weapons vindicated my suspicions.
Yeah, but if you said yourself that Saudi Arabia was potentially complicit in the attacks, why target Afghanistan? I mean, just to find one man?
Well, we targeted Afghanistan because that was where the entity led by one man, but with thousands of followers, and many of those being war-hardened veterans of the war in Afghanistan against Russia, and incidents such as the attack against 2 U.S. embassies in Africa. That was the place from which the attack against the United States had emanated, thus became, I believe, the appropriate target of our attack. But there was no relationship between Iraq and the attack against the United States on 9/11. Turned out to be no weapons of mass destruction, no justification for our diverting attention from Afghanistan, where the real war was being waged, to Iraq, where a war under false pretenses was about to start.
Senator, the CIA maintains that you were briefed in 2002 about waterboarding and other enhanced interrogation techniques used by the Bush administration on terrorism suspects. Why didn't you speak up at the time about this issue?
I'm smiling because I was asked that exact question within an hour of our conversation. I'm holding up a notebook. Since 1977, I've carried a notebook in which I inscribe, among other things, what I do throughout the day. When these charges were made that I had been briefed on enhanced interrogation, I asked the CIA to give me the dates when those briefings took place. They gave me 4 dates. I went back to my notebooks, a contemporaneous record of what I've done, and I found that on 3 of the 4 dates there was no briefing, and on the 4th date there was a CIA briefing, but it was on a subject other than enhanced interrogation. When I presented this information to the CIA and the FBI, they determined that I probably was not at any of those briefings, and they have stopped representing that I had prior knowledge of U.S. intentions in terms of enhanced interrogation.
Well, thank you for clearing that up, Senator. I mean, considering how we now know that the torture was systematic, authorized from the top down. Do you think that the Bush administration officials who did this should be prosecuted for war crimes?
That's for somebody else to decide. I think it was a very bad decision for the United States. I've never been convinced that we got any positive benefit out of it, and we sullied our fundamental values enshrined in the Constitution of the United States. Evidence derived from torture is evidence that is suspect as to its credibility.
And unfortunately, a lot of that torture testimony is a lot of what the precursors for the 9/11 Commission report. Let's move on to BP, Senator Graham. You were the chairperson on the National Commission on the BP Deepwater Horizon oil spill. Who bears the majority of the responsibility for this spill, and how do you react to the news that BP is still fighting to limit payouts to victims?
Well, I think the primary responsibility is BP, also Transocean, which was the owner of the drilling rig, and Halliburton, which was responsible for pouring the concrete, which was the initial point of failure on the Deepwater Horizon platform. As to why is BP resisting payments, I happened to be with one of their attorneys recently, and it was his contention that many of the claims that have been made are claims that have limited linkage to BP's negligence that led to the spill, and therefore were not eligible to be participants in the spill. That's something that our judicial system is going to have to sort through and decide who has a legitimate claim and what is the dollar value of that claim.
And given that Halliburton knowingly destroyed evidence and BP was criminally negligent, why are these companies still being awarded government contracts?
I'm not certain what kind of government contracts any of the three are receiving. Of course, a company like Halliburton is in a lot of businesses, and probably would be inappropriate to debar them from any participation in government contracts because of their inappropriate actions on the Deepwater Horizon.
But don't you think that the Pentagon should stop getting premier oil and gas from the very company that poisoned the entire Gulf of Mexico? I mean, do you think enough has been done to punish these corporations from the government?
They've been punished quite severely to date, and with more still to come. So I don't think anyone is going to be accused of being excessively lenient with BP, Transocean, or Halliburton.
What were those punishments?
Very severe fines. In the case of BP, they were denied access to new leases in the Gulf of Mexico. Those are actions which have significant economic consequences.
Well, unfortunately, Halliburton's stocks actually went up in light of their admitting to criminal negligence and actually destruction of evidence in light of that spill. Thank you so much for all of your time. Do you want to say a final word?
The stock market, I think it has its own value system and motivations.
Indeed it does. Thank you so much. Senator Bob Graham, really appreciate your insight and your time.
Thank you very much.
Be sure to come back tomorrow, break this out with me all over again.